Hey everybody, Steph here, and I want to talk about dots. Or if you were Lil Jon the Rapper, you'd be going dots, 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 dots. But yes, I am a dork. But dots are not silly. Dots are incredibly useful, and everybody should have a container full. I have about 6. But I brought this one out to show you my little supply of dots. Pardon the camera wiggle. Anyway, what I'm here to talk about is not so much the different sorts of dots you can make, but the science behind dots. There are lots of videos out there that tell you to make dots, how to cut up your glass, spread out your frit, chunk up some cane, and then ramp up, do a full fuse, and you're off. But how much heat do we really need? How high do we go? How long do we hold? I mean, everything has sort of a nebulous factor to it. And obviously it's all dependent, of course, too, on your kiln, because my kiln, I have one that heats 50 degrees over what the thermocouple says and one that's dead on. So dot making in each kiln is a different process. Your kiln will vary too. But I really wanted to get into the science behind dots. And so I'm going to do a little experiment, and you get to come along for the ride. Now, what I'm going to do is actually take several different types of glass and run 3 kiln experiments. I'm going to take a 1x1 square of white, black, and clear, a 1/2 inch square of the same, and a little 1/4 inch nubbin. Now, my cuts aren't perfect. You'll notice that when you see them. Some of them are a little more rectangular than others. But this will serve my purpose. So, see, that one's rectangular, but it should fuse up. But what I'm also going to do is sort of a thing to show you how different glasses behave is I'm going to do transparent blue and opal blue in the same sizes. I mean, we all know that, well, maybe we don't all know, but it's generally accepted that opals and transparents have a different sort of viscosity. Some are thicker than others. So it makes sense that they would fuse differently. I'm also going to do red, because this way you've got 2 examples of colors. This is turquoise, and the same colors, and this is the same red, only difference being one's opal and one's not. And the idea is that you'll be able to see as they fuse which is sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. You'll be able to see as they fuse how the opals work versus the clears, or, well, transparents. And I could have done this with black, white, and clear, but there are different chemicals that go into making colored glass, and I thought it wouldn't be fair if I didn't give a better sample. Now, what I'm going to do with this kiln shelf right here is pop it in my kiln, ramp it up as fast as possible to the equivalent of 1485 in my kiln, and hold for 5 minutes and then shut off. Then what I'm going to do after that is make another one of these. Again, ramp it up as fast as possible, but hold it for 10 minutes and shut off. And the third, I'll hold for 15 minutes. And then I'll come back and show you the comparison between the 5-minute, 10-minute, and 15-minute dots, so we can see, at least in my kiln, and at least with these colors, how they react. So, hold on tight, it's coming up. Okay, so we're back, and as you can see right here, this is the results of me going to top temperature, which in my kiln is somewhere between 1485 and 1495, even though I set my kiln to 1435 because it's unreliable. And I held these for 5 minutes. Pretty much what that has taught me is 5 minutes is enough for all of your 1/2 inch or smaller rounds to be fully fused. You can see the scum on these. I used thin fire. Usually what I do to get rid of the scum is a quick tumble in the rock tumbler, and then I fire polish them up as I need them. But you can see here that everything fused to a round shape in the 1/2 inch. Same with the 1/4 inch. So really, you could probably get your all of your dots done in 5 minutes if they're under 1/2 inch. For the rest of this video, I'm not going to deal with quarters and halves because 10 and 15 minutes only gave me the same result. You don't need to see it again. But what is interesting to see is... Oh, also I screwed up, and this is garnet and not red, so it's a lot darker than I was anticipating. But what's interesting to me is the way at 5 minutes, nothing fully fused round, although the black and the garnet have the softest edges. Oh, and the clear. The turquoise blue is still a bit sharp, and every one of the opals is square and pokey. I don't know how well you can see that on camera, but there are still sharp edges. You can see where it pulled up from the thin fire and rounded, but it is still a square piece of glass. So this is 5 minutes. Pardon the squeak of my chair. It is a 12-year-old office chair. And then this is 10 minutes of holding, where the black and the clear look pretty good, and as you can see on the backs, they're pretty smooth. The red garnet is smooth, although the corners have rounded. I suspect this might be as round as that one gets. But again, when you look at the opals, they're still square. They've still got that sort of weirdly hexagonal, or not hexagonal, octagonal shape to them. And they're not as pointy on the edges. Those were actually, like, you could really feel them. This is a little more subtle. But they're not smoothed up. And as you see on the smooth side, they still retain most of their square nature. This, again, was 10 minutes worth. So I was looking to see if maybe at 15, the squares would get a full softness to the edges, and maybe even if they didn't turn fully square, they would still round off every edge nicely. And I got that in a few things. Although, weirdly enough, the turquoise again has some rough edges. But these three rounded off nicely for the shape I cut them in, although I would definitely not say any of them are really in any way round, except maybe the black. The turquoise, again, had weird edges and is slightly rough to the touch, so for some reason it did not fuse well. But what I really want you to look at are these three. They're not round. They are still squarish, still with a bit of pokiness on the corners. But the part that interests me the most is, and I don't know again if the camera will show it to you, I'll bring it closer and we'll hope. There's divot all over them. So apparently, as fast as possible, to equivalent of 1485, sorry, didn't mean to bump the camera. As fast as possible to 1485 and held for 15 minutes. Won't round your 1-inch squares if they're opal, and will bring about divot. So you probably don't want to do your dots longer. You probably want to go for a shorter hold. Now, if I was going to try for 1-inch rounds, and I never do, but if I was, what I would end up doing is I would personally nip the edges so they were octagonal in shape, and that would give them few, less truly pointy corners to have to round up and pull up. And I think that if you gave it an octagonal shape, you'd end up with something more like this, or honestly, maybe even a true round, which would be what you were looking for. I mean, I suppose I can do some test firings, although, like I said, I don't use 1-inch round dots so much. So before this experiment, I used to fire as fast as possible to 1450, which is really more like 1500 to 1510 in my kiln. For this experiment, though, I actually dropped it to 1435, which puts it closer into the 1485, 1495 range, which is where more fusing happens. My bigger kiln, because it has a wonky thermocouple, I don't full fuse in it as often. I find I get far more DVIT out of it than I do in my slightly smaller kiln. So if your kiln works well, I think 1485 for 5 minutes would cover anything half-inch or smaller. And I know I keep repeating myself. If you have if you have fused 1-inch dots of a single layer, how do you do it? What's your schedule if you're willing to share, and how do they turn out? I would love to know in the comments below. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in another video soon.